Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror.
A bomb just went off in the World Trade Center. It's unbelievable.
September 11th, 2001. A day a nation was changed. At 8:46 a.m., a Boeing 767 aircraft crashed directly into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in Manhattan, New York. 20 minutes later, at 9:06 a.m., a second aircraft crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. The Twin Towers, where up to 50,000 people worked each day, collapsed in less than 90 minutes. More than 2,600 people died in the World Trade Center attacks. Citizens fled through the streets, terrorized of the attacks. Some people in the World Trade Center even committed suicide. About 30 minutes after the first two airplanes landed their attack, at 9:37 a.m., a third aircraft crashed directly into the western side of the Pentagon. A fourth plane that was theorized as heading towards the state capitol building, or even the White House, was taken down in a field somewhere in Pennsylvania. 19 Arab extremists affiliated with Middle Eastern terrorist group Al-Qaeda carried out these attacks. 125 people died at the Pentagon that day. 256 people perished on all four planes. President George W. Bush at the time responded to these attacks with the USA Patriot ACT, which stands for the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act. On October 26, 2001, President Bush opened up a conference. This conference entailed details of the USA Patriot Act, as well as him thanking everybody who worked on the bill.
Good morning and welcome to the White House. Today we take an essential step in defeating terrorism while protecting the constitutional rights of all Americans. With my signature, this law will give intelligence and law enforcement officials important new tools to fight a present danger. I commend the House and Senate for the hard work they put into this legislation. Members of Congress and their staffs spent long nights and weekends to get this important bill to my desk. I appreciate their efforts and bipartisanship in passing this new law. I want to thank the Vice President and his staff for working hard to make sure this law was passed. I want to thank the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury for being here, both of whom lead important parts of our war against terrorism. I want to thank Attorney General John Ashcroft for spending a lot of time on the Hill to make the case for a balanced piece of legislation. I want to thank the Director of the FBI and the Director of the CIA.
The act would increase surveillance of the people in the United States. One of the provisions includes the state and INS able to request a criminal history report of immigrants applying for a visa. The FBI and INS could request this information free of charge. The background check was to protect the security of the United States of America. It is stated that this information can only be used to determine legitimacy of a visa for an alien. With this new act, it would allow law enforcement to use tools for investigating organized crime and drug trafficking to investigate crimes of terror. Before the Patriot Act, courts could permit law enforcement to conduct electronic surveillance to investigate many ordinary, non-terrorism crimes such as drug crimes, mail fraud, and passport fraud. Wiretaps are also now available for law enforcement. Before, they can only use wiretaps for investigation on other crimes other than terrorism. Senator Russell Feingold agrees with this provision by stating, "There is no doubt that if we lived in a police state, it would be easier to catch terrorists." The USA Patriot Act also enabled law enforcement to investigate suspected terrorists and seize their money more easily. It requires financial institutions to report suspicious activity and cut ties to fraudulent shell banks in foreign countries. In addition, the Patriot Act permits any federal judge to issue a nationwide warrant to tap phones, electronic mail, and any instruments that suspects may conceivably use. Financial institutions are encouraged to report suspicious money deposits and withdrawals to law enforcement. This way, the federal government can confiscate any money or property suspected to be used in terrorist activity. The act also made it easier to catch terrorists in money laundering or credit card schemes that they use to help fund their terrorism. The new act would update the recent law to reflect new technological advances that are now available compared to years ago. Law enforcement can now use high-tech means to help investigate and capture suspected terrorists. Before the Patriot Act, law enforcement personnel were required to obtain a search warrant in the district where they intended to conduct a search. Officers no longer needed multiple warrants for multiple jurisdictions to pursue suspected terrorists in the U.S. Victims of computer hacking could now receive the help of law enforcement to track down the hacker. The hacker hacking the computer would be treated as trespassing, just how somebody in real life would be trespassing on your property. The Patriot Act made it so that terrorist crimes would have a more severe penalty than before. The new act prohibited anyone from harboring a terrorist fugitive. Anyone knowingly stowing away a terrorist will face the same penalties as if they were a terrorist themselves without actually performing a terrorist act. Penalties thought to be inadequate were maximized to the fullest extent. Crimes of terrorism include arson and material support to terrorists and terrorist organizations. Conspiracy penalties were also enhanced. Other punishments include terror attacks on mass transit systems and punishment of bioterrorists. The government's success in preventing another catastrophic attack on the American homeland since 9/11 would have been much more difficult, if not impossible, without the USA Patriot Act. The authorities Congress provided have substantially enhanced our ability to prevent, investigate, and prosecute acts of terror. Sections of the USA Patriot Act were set to expire on December 31st, 2005. Section 215 was among the sections ready to expire. Section 215 allows the government to obtain a secret court order requiring third parties, such as telephone companies, to hand over any records or other tangible thing if deemed relevant to an international terrorism. Page 22, counter-espionage, or foreign intelligence investigation. Section 505 was also set to expire. FBI agents now only have to state that the information sought is relevant to a national security investigation in order to obtain sensitive financial, communications, and other personal records. Sections 215 and 505 were extended beyond its expiration date. On March 2, 2006, the Senate approved the USA Improvement and Reauthorization Act of 2005. Section 215 still included warrantless surveillance even though the American people were mostly against it. The ethical concerns, even after the revision, were endless. Now there were concerns about Section 505, the section that provides for the expanded use of legitimacy of NSLs, National Security Letters. In 2004, a U.S. District Court deemed NSLs unconstitutional. Judge Victor Marrero said this section violated the free right speech under the First Amendment. The government appealed the decision, overturning it. In 2007, Marrero once again tried to take down the section by declaring it unconstitutional. This time, the government attempted to appeal it with no avail. This would lead to another revision. In December of 2008, the U.S. Court of Appeals upheld Judge Marrero's decision. They agreed that it did conflict with the speech rights of the First Amendment. The Patriot Reauthorization Act required the Inspector General to review and report the FBI's use of NSLs. The FBI issued around 200,000 NSLs from 2003 to 2006. The American people believe the FBI abused this power. In 2015, America thought it was time for a change. President Barack Obama passed a legislation that would replace the USA Patriot Act. The USA Freedom Act soon would exist. This act would end the government's automatic bulk of phone records. The act would also call for the execution of the infamous Section 215. Officials have identified no terror attack prevented solely by the call record program, and the most significant publicly cited success is the detection of a California taxi driver who sent money to the Somali terror group.